Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, Close Encounters with Arctic's Belugas, presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Giulia Ciampini. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you so much for being here with us today. Take it away, Giulia.
Thank you so much, Rob, and welcome everyone for coming. I'm really excited to talk about belugas, especially because tomorrow I'm off to Churchill for my first few rounds of beluga season this season. So we'll jump right in, and today the outline will be, I'll do a brief introduction, we'll talk about beluga biology basics and their particular adaptations, and then I want to hone in on the Churchill's Beluga Bears and Summer Wildlife Program to talk a little bit about how you can best prepare for this program and some photography tips. I find as a photographer, I really love to see what I'm going into, so I know how to prepare for that situation well. And I hope to show you some of that insights on these trips so that you can prepare extremely well. And then, of course, a question and answer period. So we'll start with our little introduction. Myself, I am Giulia Ciampini. I have a Bachelor of Science in Biological Sciences, a Master of Science in Education, and a Master's of Fine Arts in Documentary Film and Photography. I am an expedition leader, a photographer, and educator, and I have guided in about 30 countries at this point. Also a fervent animal lover, bird lover, and I do guide most frequently in Churchill, Manitoba, for their Northern Lights season, for their polar bear season, and for their beluga season. So you can find me on Instagram at Giulia Expeditions or www.giuliaciampini.com. And I've been a photographer for now 15 years and an educator for 10. So let's dive into the biology of beluga whales, a little bit of the evolutionary biology. But before I start there, I wanted to showcase two wonderful books. They are illustrated celebrations of whale biology, made for children, but really wonderful for adults as well. The first one's The Secret Lives of Whales, and the second, Whales, an Illustrated Celebration. And I think about, in my previous life, I was a high school teacher and a college teacher, and literacy rates are a huge deal. But I also think if you can get people to care about species, they're more likely to act in a way that conserves them. So I think catching gifts for children when they're quite young and you can instill a love of nature, a love of wildlife, is a wonderful thing you can do, and I highly, highly recommend these two books. They are phenomenal. So we'll dive into the biology of whales. So the cetaceans include all whales, dolphins, and porpoises, and there are about 90 living species of whales at the moment. Now, whales are streamlined aquatic mammals, meaning they're warm-blooded, they birth live young, they lactate, have hair, and breathe air. If we look just very briefly into the evolutionary history of whales, we see a very gradual evolution of mammals from these fully terrestrial species to a fully marine species. And the first whales started to evolve about 50 million years ago. And through this evolution, we see this corresponding adaptations. We see an elongation of the body, creation of fins, the blowholes moving, and I'll show you a little bit more there. But there's a few key things I want you to take away here. The first is the first whales evolved over 50 million years ago, starting with animals that you wouldn't think would become whales. And at a certain point, around 28 to 33 million years ago, we have a separation between toothed whales and baleen whales. And we'll talk more about that. So when we look at a few skeletons of two early whale species, the lower right was one of the first whale species, Pachycetus, and it was a typical land animal. And it was just a particular formation in the ear that gave rise to clues that they were closely related to current whale species. And as we progress through time, Ambulocetus you start to see a more aquatic lifestyle. The legs become shorter, its hands and feet enlarge to be more paddle-like, and its tail becomes longer and more muscular. And so we're starting to see this evolution of body shape towards a more aquatic lifestyle. And as we continue through time, closer and closer to today, you see that the hind limbs begin to disappear, the front limbs begin to transform into fins used for paddling in water, and the body actually starts to lose most or nearly all of its hair. And we're seeing this streamlined body shape in our whales, our earlier whale species. Another thing we start to notice as these pre-whales kind of evolve this increasingly aquatic lifestyle is the nostrils that were once located more to the end of the cranium start to become located further and further back on the skulls. And so now when we look at current whales, we see this blowhole more closely located on the top of the head above the eyes. But this was the bony nostrils that just began to progressively move towards the back of the head. So we have all these whale species, 90 current living species of whales, and they are divided into two different suborders, the baleen whales and the toothed whales. And except for the sperm whale, the toothed whales tend to be much smaller than most of the baleen whales. So in this diagram, you see the baleen whales all facing right on the right side, or sorry, on the left side, and you see the toothed whales all facing left on the right side. So we can definitely see that big size difference between the baleen larger whales and the smaller toothed whales. So as we deepen our comparison between these two, the odontocetes are the toothed whales, mysticetes are the baleen whales. We see that the toothed whales have a single blowhole and the baleen whales have a paired blowhole, much like our own nostril. And we see obviously a very distinguishing feature is the toothed whales have teeth, the baleen whales have baleen. Now, what does this look like? So the baleen is this structure you see on the top left. It's made from keratin, which is the same protein that makes up our fingernails and our hair. And it can be quite extensive, quite long. For example, the baleen of the bull-headed whale can be 4 meters long. I think I'm a meter and a half tall. So you think of how absolutely gigantic that can be. In comparison, here an orca with its pegged-like teeth. Beluga whales are part of the toothed whales, the odontocetes, and they have 8 to 10 peg-shaped teeth on each side, both upper and lower jaws. So you're averaging between 34 and 40 teeth for a beluga whale. And the teeth are very much like tree rings in that they can be used to age the beluga whale. So just like we can age a tree based on how the tree rings grow, we can age a beluga whale based on particular things that we see in the teeth. So beluga whales acquire this growth layer group, GLG, for each year they age. And you can see that here, just a distinct chunk, almost just like the tree ring would grow. And the oldest beluga record has 80 of these growth layer groups. And there is some debate on how long of a lifespan a beluga whale has, and I read in 2 cases, I've read 30 to 40 years and around 70 to 80 years, and I think this was based on how scientists looked at these growth rings on the teeth, whether one growth layer group represented 1 year or 2, and that's in debate. So the beluga whale's closest relative is the narwhal, and these are the only 2 species in a family called the Monodontidae, which means one tooth, and this is a reference to the tusk of the male narwhal. But as we saw, it is a misnomer for the beluga whales because beluga whales possess quite a few teeth. And so when we look at the 3 species of whales that occupy the Arctic year-round. They are the beluga, the narwhal, and the bow-headed whale. And this is a map of the narwhal and the beluga species and their ranges. And in green, you see the beluga whale range. In soft purple, you see the narwhal annual range. And in the darker purple, you see where the species overlap. And the place that I would love you to focus on is this Hudson Bay in the lower left corner. That's where we're going to be talking mostly about, because that's where the Churchill programs run. So interestingly, as an aside, there was a particular narwhal that grew 2 tusks. And as an interesting story, on a remote island in Greenland, there was a scientist in 1990 who was collecting specimens of narwhal. And he noticed a very unusual specimen, an unusual skull on a hunter's roof. The teeth were very bizarre. The top one pointed forward, a couple spiraled out. They looked kind of like a mix of a narwhal and a beluga, but too many teeth for narwhal and too few for beluga. And the hunter told the scientist that the skull had belonged to a strange animal he had killed in the late 1980s. He had also killed 2 others on that same day, and all had beluga-like flippers and narwhal-like tails with a solid gray skin. And later there was an analysis of DNA extracted from the skull, and it revealed that this belonged to an adult, first generation of a son of a narwhal mother and a beluga father. And this was shared in the New York Times. And there hasn't been evidence of a beluga whale narwhal hybridization in at least 1 million years. So really interesting skull to have found. So beluga whales are relatively small, weighing between 1,100 and 3,300 pounds, about 4 meters in length. I like to think of them as the size of a kayak, because when they're near you on a kayak, that's what it feels like. And the species name for the beluga whales, Delphinia proteus lucas, comes from white, leucocyte, lucas white, and the whole whale itself is all white except for the margins of the flipper and tail flukes, which you can see here are darker in coloration, and this is for the adult. So let's talk a little bit about the beluga whale habitat. So this is a wonderful diagram by the World Wildlife Federation showing the distribution of the summer and annual range of the beluga whale itself. You'll notice it inhabits the icy polar regions of the Arctic and subarctic coasts, Svalbard, Greenland, Europe, North America, and Asia in those icy polar waters. And you notice the distinction between the summer range with the almost checked pattern and the solid pattern of the regular range. The population of belugas estimated worldwide is about 200,000, just about, and it's a species of least concern with some endangered, critical, and extirpated populations. So in general, least concerned, but there are particular populations of beluga whales who are not faring as well. And of the world's 22 existing beluga population whale populations, 7 have been identified in Canadian waters, and they occur in the St. Lawrence Estuary, in Hudson Bay, and in the Arctic Ocean. And so we're zooming in closer and closer to the Hudson Bay area because that's where we are focused. So this is a wonderful little video that shows the migration of beluga whales in that area. Unfortunately, it's not playing now, but I encourage you to look for it on YouTube, Nat Geo Wild. I'll include a link in when we send out the video. It's really nice to see visually what it looks like as these whales are migrating through. And so this species habitat really does depend on the seasons and this progression of ice breakup and freeze. And this is a gorgeous picture by Paul Nicklin of a pod of belugas swimming off the coast of Baffin Islands in Nunavut. And so when the ice starts to break up in late spring, belugas they'll travel in groups called pods along this ice edge towards their summer habitat, which consists of shallow coastal waters and estuaries. And then when summer turns to fall, they'll swim to deeper waters. When winter arrives, the pods move offshore areas where they live in ice leads, which are narrow, linear cracks in the ice and open areas in the sea ice called polyanyas. And so we'll dive into some of the adaptations of beluga whales for its icy environment, because it's quite incredible to see how perfectly adapted it is to its environment. And so again, they're living primarily in areas with Arctic sea ice, and these years of evolution have really prepared this beluga whale to excel in its environment. So obviously one of the features we see is its camouflage. Many animals, both predator and prey, develop white fur or white coloration, white feathers in the winter months for camouflage in ice and snow. So we see this a lot in our Churchill animals. We see it in our gray wolves, our snowy owls, our polar bears, our Arctic fox, our Arctic hare. We're seeing this very frequently, the ptarmigan as well. And this really helps to disguise the whales from their primary predators, which are killer whales and now polar bears more. So there's another interesting video you might want to watch online, and it's how polar bears hunt for beluga whales. And there's a few strategies that I've seen. One is they will hang around where the beluga whales will breathe, those breathing holes, and they'll wait until the belugas will come up for air, and they'll swipe at the belugas and cut them. And particularly if the whales are stuck within that one breathing hole, and they'll tire them out and tire them out. And you see the size difference between a beluga and a whale, and the size difference between a polar bear and a beluga. And in open water, the beluga has such an advantage, and so the polar bear has to be a little bit more sneaky in order to hunt successfully on a full adult beluga and even a young beluga. So interestingly enough, the species name, the genus name translates to dolphin without a fin, and you notice in beluga whales there is no dorsal fin. You might see this beautiful elongated dorsal fin in, for example, an orca whale. It measures up to 6 feet in larger males, but we don't see that at all in the beluga whale. So instead of this dorsal fin, belugas have this tough dorsal ridge, and this helps them more easily swim under these ice floes, these sheets of floating ice, and they're more able to swim closer to the surface of the sea ice. So they can use this tough dorsal ridge to also open holes in the sea ice so they can breathe. Remember, they are mammals, and so they have to breathe air. So they have to come to the surface to breathe. And this also minimizes the surface area of their body. So you're losing less heat on that dorsal fin. So this allows them to conserve more heat in these cold Arctic waters. And so unlike other whale species also, belugas have this long distinctive neck and an unfused vertebrae in the neck. So as a result of this, they can move their heads around from side to side, and you might see a beluga whale look at you, like physically move their head around, whereas another whale like orca, the neck vertebrae is fused, and they're more built for power and speed. And so we see in beluga whales they're more flexible and they can swim backwards. They're more maneuverable in their swimming movements. Notice their front fin there. It's very small and compact and paddle-like. So beluga whales also have a very, very thick skin and a deep layer of blubber. And in a beluga whale, this blubber accounts for more than 40% of the whale's weight. And the purpose of this blubber is to insulate the whale, to really streamline the body, and to be used as an energy reserve. And in particular, communities in the north and Inuit communities in the Canadian Arctic, for example, the skin and outer blubber layer is an important food source. And so beluga whales, they are carnivores. The common foods of beluga whales include herring, capeling, Arctic cod, Arctic char, mollusks, crustaceans, a variety of food sources. And we'll come back again to their teeth. And you notice the teeth themselves are peg-like, much like a pirate's foot peg leg. And as a result, they're not meant for tearing meat or biting prey. The teeth are mostly used to hold prey in place. And so belugas eat a lot. You're thinking 50 to 60 pounds of food in a day. And interestingly enough, one study in a paper done by the Smithsonian, why do beluga whales blow bubbles? They found that in a study of beluga whales, it's more than a source of amusement. They're able to blow bubbles with their mouth. This can be a sign of playfulness, but they're also suspected to serve particular functional purposes. For example, a sudden bubble burst can indicate a defensive reaction, while a matching bubble rings blown by a pair of whales is thought to be a social bonding behavior. And there's one little comment on this article that I thought was quite interesting. In summer, males again blew bubble rings, swatting to change their shape and swimming through them as if they were hoops. So this is a species that makes its own toys. So play and particular functional purposes is the reason why these animals are able to create these bubbles in water. And another interesting study came out recently is belugas actually changed the shape of the melon in their head, and they're thinking this has these facial displays during particular social interactions have particular purposes as well. So if we look at this study published in Scientific America called Belugas Flirt and Fight by Morphing Their Squishy Foreheads, we see that this beluga whale's melon, which is the technical term for the mass of fat on their forehead that really helps with echolocation. So the study showed that beluga whales can shake and wiggle and thrust and bump these bulbs to convey, just like we convey emotion using facial expressions. So a melon shake appeared to be used primarily by males towards females during courtship, and a melon push seemed to be a display of aggression. So besides this illustration, if we look at that, you can see this video here online. Again, I'll include links later. You can see this beluga whale demonstrating the shake of the bulbous melon. And here's a picture of the way in which the beluga can actually voluntarily change the shape of its melon from a relaxed position to extending forward or backwards. It's quite incredible. So sound and echolocation are quite, again, of paramount importance to beluga whales. They themselves are incredible communicators with over 1,200 distinct vocalizations, whether clicks, screams, whistles, chirps. They're just one of my favorite things about doing these beluga whale programs is when you're on a Zodiac or when you're on the boat and you're able to put the hydrophone in the water and then actually listen to the sounds the belugas make. And I remember doing this last summer, and the sounds change from pod to pod or depending on time, and so it's never this consistent, this is a beluga whale sound. There's so many different sounds, and they're known as the sea canaries because of how vocal and lively their communication is. So if you're on a program, you might have a chance to hear the sounds the beluga whale makes, and it's unlike anything else. So these animals can essentially see with sound. You have to think about the environment they're living in. They're living in deep, deep oceans, hunting in pitch black water, cluttered rivers, icy environments. And so the visual clues are not their dominant sense. Their dominant sense is this sound and echolocation. So you think of how logical this strategy is given their unique environment. Also, to the point that sound travels about 4 times faster in water than air. And so many species echolocate, including most bats, all toothed whales, and some small mammals. When we look at the beluga whale, for example, we see that the sound the beluga whale makes is not produced by the vocal cords in the larynx like humans, but in structures found inside the blowhole. And so the beluga whales don't actually need to open their mouths to communicate. The sound is transmitted through the melon itself. So looking a little bit more deeply there, the click sounds, so they'll send out these waves of click sounds, high frequency click sounds, and they're created in a particular structure in the head called the phonic lips. And they will send pressurized air past these lip-like structures, and this will create this vibrating clicking sound. Okay, the bump on the head, the melon, will change its shape depending on the sound the whale is emitting. And this sound acts like a sonar system. The beluga will emit this wave of sound as a series of these high frequency clicks, and this sound will bounce off an object and returning an echo back to the beluga whale to give the whale information about the object's distance and size and even density. And it's such a well-developed system. I think I read that up to 15 meters away, they can resolve something the size of a kernel of corn. And so the returning sound waves are received in a very fat-filled cavity in the lower jaw and conducted from there to the inner ear, to the auditory nerve, sending a signal to the brain. And so when you look at beluga whales in captivity in particular, you think of how difficult an environment it must be because of the way they can no longer use their primary senses. And you see this so often with whales in captivity, and it's quite unfortunate. Interestingly enough, as we look back, we saw that there was kind of two divisions of whales, baleen and toothed whales. The baleen whales don't have these phonic lips or this melon, and so their sounds, those gorgeous beluga whale sounds that you've surely heard, are produced more, it's thought that they're produced more in the throat, more like humans and vocal cords. So two distinct species of, two distinct lines of whales and two distinct ways to create sound. And so we think of also a big threat to whales is the sounds that we're creating in our oceans. And so you're thinking of impact from shipping lanes, yes, physical strikes on the whales itself, but also the impact of how much sound is produced by humans as we go through their particular habitat. And so you look on the left, you see that the distribution of whale habitat, and you see the shipping lanes that they're proposing to build between 2040 and 2059. And so there's this exact using the habitat of whales for these normal ships and these icebreaker ships, and the different sounds they will eventually create in the ocean environment. So ocean noise, again, really interrupts the normal whale behavior. And you're seeing, for example, there's a particular population of beluga whales in Cook Inlet in Alaska, and they live in an area with a lot of vessel traffic, oil and gas exploration and development, dredging, airports, military, lots of noise-making, human-caused activities, and that is also one of the populations that isn't doing that well. So life cycle, we'll talk a little bit about the life cycle of beluga whales and why Churchill in particular. And so beluga whales, you probably know this already, but they're very social animals and have a great curiosity towards human. They usually live in groups of 5 to 25, but can congregate in these megapods of up to 1,000 animals. And Churchill itself, it's located on at the western shore of Hudson Bay in Canada, and it's known as the beluga capital of the world. And so here is an aerial photograph of a megapod of belugas. And this western Hudson Bay population is home to about 60,000 beluga whales. And every summer, roughly 3,500 make their way to the Churchill River. So when we look at the migration pattern of these whales, the beluga whales will migrate from their northern range down to the Churchill River estuary, and they'll do so in June to August. And these shallow waters provide really ideal conditions for calving, feeding, and molting. And then they'll again return up north to the winter. And where we do our programs, it is right where this Churchill River meets the Hudson Bay, where the seawater meets the river water. So you see where it says Sea North Tours there. That's kind of right in the area where we do our kayaking, where we do our Zodiac tours. It is quite an incredible place. So the first pods of beluga whales will come to that Churchill River estuary in early July, and they'll remain throughout the summer to give birth to their young and feed the capelin and the fish there. So the summer grounds are really calving, feeding, and molting. And there's an interesting project going on currently in Churchill. You might see the boat when you're on there. And it's a little bit of citizen science. And so they'll have photographers, explore.org. And this beluga boat travels around that river estuary and captures belugas in the bay, and then uploads images of these belugas and has people come in to help sex the belugas. And so when you look at a beluga whale to try to determine its sex, you're looking for on a female particular grooves, mammillary grooves in the lower part, and for a male just a particular line, urogenital groove. So there's a different look to that area in the beluga whales. Females mature, sexually mature between 4 to 7 years old, where males it's 6 to 7, it's a little bit later. And beluga whales generally give birth in these summer areas because the water is relatively warmer, and the newborns lack this thick layer of blubber to help protect them from that cold water. And so the calves do benefit from the warmer waters found in those shallow tidal flats. And so beluga whale will birth one calf every 1 to 3 years. Gestation period is about 14 months, and the calves are born between April and September. The newborns weigh about 150 pounds and have just less than 1 inch blubber. And so this picture shows a 2-month-old baby beluga whale. And the calves will actually stay with their mother for about 2 years. In that first point of their life, they are like feeding off the mother's milk. And that milk is a very high percentage of fat, about 40% of that is fat. And the offspring are weaned at between 1.5 and 2 years old. And so when we look at the whales in the bay, how can we tell what is a calf versus a yearling versus a subadult versus an adult? And one of the clues we're looking at is the coloration. They progress from birth a very, very dark color and then get progressively whiter and whiter and whiter, lighter and lighter. So the color is really lightening as the whales reach adulthood. And another few characteristics, the juvenile tends to be 50 to 75% of the length of an adult, gray in color, whereas a calf is about 33 to 50% of the length of adult, and they'll stay under two body lengths away from the adult whale. So they'll stay really close, adjacent or on top or beside the nearest adult whale. They won't tend to go ahead of the whale. So in an interesting way, you can determine the age of the whale itself. And interestingly enough, the Western Hudson Bay belugas are the smallest of all the beluga whales, and their average length is about 10 to 13 feet, and they're a little bit lighter, so between maybe 650 and 1,100 pounds. And the calves are about my height, about 5 feet in length. And so I alluded to the fact that they also molt. So many mammals, including people, shed skin constantly. Belugas uniquely will go through a seasonal molt, and they'll come into these shallow waters with these gritty bottoms, and they'll rub off their old skin, old yellowed skin. And so you see beluga whales congregating in the summer to do this as well. So we'll talk a little bit about Churchill and the beluga program there, and maybe how to prepare for the photography. And just to give you a sense of kind of the experience, here is a gang of us on Sea North Tours Zodiac, and you can see a beluga whale kind of in close proximity there. So often I get asked which camera is the right camera, and there definitely is no right camera. You can create excellent images from a small point and shoot, a phone camera, a DSLR, a mirrorless, doesn't matter. The most important camera is the one that you have with you out ready to take pictures. Obviously, there will be distinct advantages to different cameras. Interchangeable lenses give you, a wide range of particular shooting conditions that you will excel in. But I will say there is no best camera. Your camera, the one you use, the one you are comfortable with, will be your best camera. Oftentimes when preparing for these kind of trips, you're definitely bringing a camera. You might consider lenses, lens hoods. Wide angle will be really great for your landscapes, your townscapes, maybe some people, or any circumstance where you are physically close to the whales or small tight spaces. Your telephoto lenses are incredible for wildlife, for your long distance landscapes where you will compress the scene, for your bird life and for your bears or other mammals. And you might consider a macro lens for florals if that's your thing. Polarizing filter is really useful to reduce glare on reflective surfaces like water, and UV filters I always recommend to protect your lenses. A UV filter is just a clear filter that you screw onto the top of a lens, and it gives you a particular barrier against sand, water, scratches, and also if you drop or hit your lens, it's likely that the UV filter breaks and the lens itself remains okay. Then you have a camera bag and water protection. And I want to show you some beautiful guest images from last summer. The bird life is incredible in Churchill. A lot of wonderful species will migrate through. And so if you're thinking birds are something that you would like to photograph, definitely consider bringing a long lens. They tend not to be close to us, but they do exist in the area that we will visit, and there are particular times and places that you can go to hope to see particular bird species. So if you love birds, long lens will be your friend. And then also on the Zodiac rides, we might encounter, maybe if we're lucky, a bear on land. And so this was taken from a Zodiac quite far away, but a really nice experience to be able to use a long lens to capture wildlife a little bit further away and kind of capture a sense of the environment. And you see the Arctic terns all kind of giving away this bear's position. And so if you're lucky on a trip, you might come across some summer bears. They might come close, they might stay quite far, but it's nice to have a sense of what the environment looks like so that you can plan and prepare your gear accordingly. So here's an example of wildlife that we saw while on the rovers. And if you scan the environment, you'll see it might be a little bit challenging to see, but kind of mid-frame, you'll see a small Arctic fox, the little ears poking out. It looks so much like the rock itself. So having a longer zoom might help you get the shots that you want. If you want an animal kind of filling the frame a little bit more, that long zoom is going to be your friend in these cases. There's some brilliant summer wildflowers, absolutely incredible fireweed and wonderful Arctic species where the growing season is so short, but the flowers are so brilliant. And so if you're interested in photographing Arctic wildflowers and plants, shrubs, lichen, Your macro lens or your macro setting on your camera on your phone is a really nice one to try. Oftentimes newer phones will automatically enable a macro lens. So as you bring your phone closer to the subject, your macro capability will start, and it will help you focus more closely on small objects. Another thing you can do with your phone itself is as you bring your phone closer to the object, you can change the lens that you're using. So you can zoom in with the different lenses that you have. So you might see that you have a 0.5 or a 1 times or a 10 times zoom. So you get really close with your phone and then change your lens to maybe the 10 times zoom or the 3 times zoom, and that will get you even closer to flowers. So that's a nice little tip there. So the flowers come with a wonderful history, wonderful stories, really interesting species. And if that's your thing, I also highly recommend you download an app called Seek. It is a wonderful app that helps ID plants, for example, also birds, also other things, but in particular plants it's amazing at. And it's really nice to explore the Churchill area and use that app to identify some of the plants that you'll come across. So beluga whales are inherently difficult to photograph, their eyes or their faces. They come up quite quickly. So I would definitely encourage, if you're using your longer lens, a fast shutter speed, a burst mode, eye tracking, and then particular times when you're really getting a sense of the behavior. So slowing down, watching as they move, and trying to anticipate when they come up to breathe. It is a challenge, though. It is a wonderful challenge. You might see them sky hopping, so kind of not standing, but coming up parallel in the water. So you see their heads come up, but most likely you're seeing them coming up to breathe and hoping to capture the eyes as they do so. Now, when it comes to stabilization, whether tripods, monopods, or beanbags, your tripod is not at all practical on a Zodiac or a kayak or any of the boats. They're bulky, they're heavy. There isn't that much room on the boat itself for that. A monopod would be a better alternative, only if needed. I don't particularly find it is needed, but if you do decide that you want a monopod or tripod for maybe another purpose, by all means. I would recommend that you pack your monopod tripod in your checked luggage, and also know before your trip that all photo trip guests do have access to dedicated NatHab tripods, which guests do share. So if you want to ensure that you have exclusive use of a tripod that you know and you have used before, bring your own, but you know that you do have access to shared tripods, and they're quite lovely tripods. So we kind of explore a few different regions in Churchill itself. This is one of the older forts that we'll see. A wonderful, wonderful area for wildflowers as well. And we'll go on a few different types of tours. So you'll see we have a boat and town tour. We'll take you on this bigger boat. It's not really a big boat, it's quite small, but you get a higher vantage point on the belugas themselves. And if there are belugas in the area and they're coming quite close, you can see that you don't necessarily need a long lens for this perspective. It's a wider lens will do you quite well. The Zodiac, again, now a smaller boat, taking you closer and more intimately in contact with the beluga whales. And an example of the kayaking, seen from above or seen from the side. And the kayaking is the most of the intimate experiences. It is absolutely exceptional to be amongst some beluga whales and having them nudge the boat and kind of come up around you, beside you. And if you paddle quickly backwards or quickly forwards, they might follow you. And some people have really noticed, depending on the way that they paddle, the beluga whales will become more curious and more interested in being near you. But I wouldn't recommend a long lens, a DSLR, a mirrorless for a kayaking experience. It does feel, of the three boat experiences, your first two, your bigger boat and your Zodiac, are good for your bigger cameras, but for the kayak, your best friend here is your phone or a smaller point and shoot or even a GoPro. So just to kind of fill you in on the kayak experience, you'll go through a safety demo and an instructional time with the kayak guide. You can choose between a 1 or 2 person kayak, depending on what is available, and you start on shore. And so you'll be launched when you feel comfortable. The safety steps are all taken there with you. And you always have a safety zodiac in water, and you kayak around that safety zone in that river estuary. And so this is obviously dependent on weather and tides, but it's a really interesting experience. And so just kind of this experience of curious belugas coming close to you is unlike anything in the world. So before the trip, I recommend you have a copy of your manual, whether an electronic version or a paper version. I always find people come into a vacation or a trip thinking, on that trip I'll have time to learn how to use my camera. But oftentimes the trips are quite busy, and yes, you have time to learn it, but it is such an advantage to take a few moments to get familiar with it before your trip. YouTube videos are phenomenal. If you type in the name of your particular camera, you're going to find a few YouTube videos that will start you off and help you get ready for success, so that by the time you're on the trip itself, it's not this foreign thing. You are more familiar with it, and then you can build your knowledge more on that trip itself. Definitely extra batteries, definitely chargers. Please double check your bags. I've had guests forget batteries, chargers, camera cards. It is heartbreaking. We'll find alternatives, but it pays to do a checklist and double check what's in your bag. And if you can, clean your sensors and lenses before you come. So when you're on the boats, they can get a little bit wet, a little bit soggy. So having proper protection for your cameras is always a good idea. A couple of things I recommend is a dry bag or a small Pelican case for your phone, or particular cases. These are Pelican's a nice brand, but to put your camera cards in or your camera batteries or things that are vital that you don't want wet with electronics. So unfortunately, maybe the videos are playing. Yeah. So here you can see how close the whales can get, how incredible that experience is. I'm going to play that again. So you definitely want to have your phone kind of around your neck and waterproofed items. And here's 2 guests from a previous year showcasing how they've used, like what the life jacket situation looks like and how they're using their cell phones and this device. And so it so nicely tucks into your life jacket as well. So it's not just dangling. So you're protecting it from water damage, but you're also protecting it from falling off your neck. So I think that's a really great thing to bring to a program. I also have guests often ask me, should I bring underwater housing with my camera? And I want to showcase this image that shows Judy, an amazing, amazing guide, and her camera, and how difficult it would be to submerge that camera in the water. You're sitting quite high up on the Zodiac, on the big boat, and likely even in the kayak. So to get a camera with proper underwater housing and to get really deep down enough into the water, it's probably not your best bet. But a GoPro on a handheld stick is permitted and recommended if you want to get that underwater shot. Obviously, you have to be very sensitive on how we're using them, and if multiple guests are using them, we take turns just to make sure everyone has a chance to get the ideal position. I don't find too many guests do bring them, but this is one way around it. And so if you do, consider that long telescoping stick to ensure that you can get your Zodiac to a depth required for your best beluga shots. And then it's really a matter of trial and error, but you can get a particular app on your phone where you can see what the camera sees depending on your model of GoPro, and you can click the shutter and see what you're seeing underwater. Maybe it takes 2 people to coordinate that effort, but might be worth a try. So On the Churchill adventures, we also see the beautiful sled dogs. There may be a possibility, depending on weather, to do a mile run with them on a cart, but we always get to meet them and hear about their story and the story of the dog sledders and their family, and it's an incredible experience, one of my favorites. This is Dave Daly. He's a Métis dog sledder who owns this dog sledding place that we go to. Absolutely phenomenal person to listen to and to learn from. So there's always interesting people. If you're into portrait photography, consider maybe the lenses that you might want to do. Churchill is well known for its incredible murals. And just to give you a sense of the vehicle that we're going into, one of the smaller buses that we're on is this. You have room for yourself, and then we also have that rover that we'll use for a night adventure. So a few more things. Your power sources are the North American Canadian power sources. Memory cards are a really great idea, and really faster cards are better when it comes to wildlife and birds. You don't want that lag between writing, like taking the picture and writing the image to the card. So that faster card will help you capture those moments that you're really looking for. Do pack your lens cleaners and cloths. And if you are bringing a laptop, also consider a USB stick or a hard drive to back up your images, and a power surge with surge protection so that you can have enough power to charge your phone, your camera batteries, and your computer. And then often with trips, you'll have obviously ways to pack your luggage, but consider your light carry-on, and this is your laptop, your medication, your important things. You'll likely have a valet bag, your camera bag, a little bit heavier, also gets carried onto the plane, but it will be put in the front of the plane, very safe, nice for fragile items. And then you have your checked luggage, which is kind of everything else. So I mentioned these two books earlier, but I also wanted to say, for me, guiding in Beluga, as a child, I would listen to the Baby Beluga song by Raffi ad nauseum as a child. And it's so interesting to see that this is one of the places I guide in. Our earlier influences definitely help create who we are. And so if you have an opportunity to help young people fall in love with the natural environment, whether it's grandchildren and children or any young people that you can encounter, I think it will be a powerful thing in their lives. Another great resource that I wanted to share is the National Geographic's Secret of Whales. Incredible documentary here. So with that, I think I will end and start a question and answer period. Maybe a relatively short one, but thank you so much.
All right, Giulia, thank you so much. Now, before we start in with the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. All right, let's get to some questions. So can you tell us what the belugas feed on in the deeper waters during the fall and winter?
Oh, that's a great question. I think it's their feeding strategy is so like it's not a particular one species that they will feed. They have such a range of fish and crustaceans and mollusks that they eat. I don't know a particular species that they'll congregate towards in those deeper waters, only that the capelin and the herring and the char will be for the shallower water. So that's a great question. I don't know if there's any one particular species in their more Arctic environments.
So how do the belugas go about protecting their young from attack from predators, and what predators might be out there for them?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. So that's actually one of the reasons you find belugas in these river estuaries. So one of the main predators right now is killer whales, and killer whales will primarily live more north. And so by coming more south into these river estuaries, they're giving the young a chance to grow, to kind of develop their fat, to increase in size, to be a little bit safer before they migrate north. But one thing we're seeing with climate change is the range of orcas now is maybe extending more south, more into this safe zone. So you're seeing, just like the Arctic fox and the red fox, you're seeing this almost merging of habitat areas, and so competition become not competition, but predator-prey relationships are changing as time is going on. But their main predators are these orca whales and polar bears.
Great, thank you. So it seems that whales tend to breach looking like they have their tail up. Do belugas breach the water in a similar fashion?
Ooh, like will you get a like a very distinct tail shot if that's the
I believe that's the question.
yeah. So I'm trying to think in my experience. I've seen flukes. I have seen flukes. I have seen like gentle flukes. I don't know it's as distinct as maybe a humpback whale or other types where it's a very like that kind of motion. But I have seen flukes, just not like you would see a humpback whale's fluke. Where I have seen some really sweet flukes is when you see a mother and calf, and the calf is obviously the mother helps support the calf in their early life to learn how to breathe, to learn how to move, and their movements are a little bit more awkward. But you sometimes see the calf's tail coming up right beside the mother's tail, and I think that's a really sweet moment there.
Great, thank you so much. So I know we do some kayaking as well as we're on the boats, but is it possible to swim with a wetsuit and a snorkel with the belugas?
I don't think that's part of these programs. I think it is entirely possible in theory, but it's not written in these particular programs.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So is there a particular camera lens that you think would be best for shooting the belugas? And if I was on a summer trip, is there a lens that is best for shooting polar bears if I happen to see one?
Oh yes, so this is something I struggle with all the time. I'm leaving tomorrow and I haven't packed my camera gear yet because there's always the thought of what gear should I bring. So for me, I think I'm gonna go with a wide angle lens, maybe a 16 to 35 to capture my wide point of view. I'm gonna likely bring a mid-range, whether it's a 24 to 70 for kind of that mid-range, or I might do a 50 prime. And then for your your wildlife, your polar bears, your anything a little bit further away, currently I'm shooting with 100 to 500 with a telephoto adapter. Those give me quite a bit of reach, and I'm able to capture wildlife as they're further away. But there's always, with every photographer, I think there's always that desire for just a little bit more reach. But with that desire for more reach, you're often having it a more challenge to get the animal within the frame, more shake, lower light capabilities. So it's always a trade-off. But I think how I'm going to approach this season is bring a range of lenses, one wide, one medium, one long, with a telephoto adapter, and then also a GoPro for underwater shots. So I hope that answers your question, but it's definitely a personal preference.
Great, thanks for the advice. So can you remind us what the app is that you recommended us to
Oh,
get to help identify things?
absolutely. So it's called Seek, SEEK. Absolutely phenomenal app for plant ID in particular. Really great for birds and other wildlife. And what's nice about it as well, again, if you're looking to get people you care about caring about wildlife and nature, you can do challenges and you can learn quite a bit about the species themselves. So I think it's well worth downloading. Seek, SEEK.
Great, thank you for that. Unfortunately, that will be the last question that we do have time for today. So I'd like to throw it back to you for any closing comments you may have.
I just wanted to thank you all for spending your lunchtime with me. I hope you learned one or two things about beluga whales. And I hope that you have a chance to get up there to Churchill I can't wait to go myself, and I'll share some images when I return. But thank you so much for spending some time with me, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Giulia, thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd also like to thank everyone who tuned in today. Now, if you are interested in information on how you can travel with NatHab, please give us a call at the number on your screen or send us an email at info@nathab.com. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.